successful coaching. Coaching is about having a supportive conversation with a professional about what matters to them, about their personal and professional aspirations, about the barriers that are in their way of achieving those. And sometimes those can be very practical things, and sometimes they can be more subconscious things, limiting beliefs that they could or couldn't do something, or should or shouldn't do something. And creating that headspace and that reflective, confidential, non-judgmental space allows that person to really explore who they are and who they want to be and where they want to get to. And the coach facilitates that journey for them. And seeing a shift in somebody's outlook, in hearing them say, now I hear myself say that out loud, I realise, it's one of these light bulb moments. And that's what I believe successful coaching does. Part of that is tapping into the person's intrinsic motivation. In this book, Daniel Pink talks about the secrets of intrinsic motivation, what really drives us as an individual. And he brings it down to three main areas. One is autonomy. How much sense of ourself and our own decision making can we bring to our tasks and to our actions? The second thing is mastery. Are we going to develop? Are we going to improve our skill set and develop towards a goal by doing this thing? And thirdly, purpose. Is it in line with what we believe to be important? Is it creating an impact which is bigger than just for myself? And when you can tap into somebody's intrinsic motivation, which you can do through coaching conversations, because there's nothing else to hide behind, that's really powerful. It raises awareness and it encourages the participants to make choices based on those three factors: their autonomy, their mastery, and their purpose. And it's incredibly empowering. So obviously all of that's wonderful for the individual. How does it benefit the school as a whole? Well, we're talking here about changing the culture often in a school. And what do we mean by culture? I would perhaps describe it as a set of shared experiences and beliefs and the types of relationships and interactions that you have in that school. And I work for a company called Leadership Edge, and that's what we were born through, working with a school who wanted to change the culture. And it was a school in Wolverhampton called East Park. And in February 2016, I've got a copy of their Ofsted report here. It was inadequate, I don't know if you can see that, inadequate across all areas, and was put into special measures. The new head teacher, Hayley Guest, brought in a coaching culture. And 3 years later, in 2019, the school was outstanding across all areas. And Hayley absolutely says that coaching was a huge part of that. If I just read a few of the comments from that Ofsted report: leaders actively welcome challenge, seek advice, and embrace coaching in order to improve. Staff clearly value the support and challenge they receive. Leaders are unequivocal about the importance of staff well-being. Words transpire into action that makes a significant difference to high staff morale, which is clearly visible. And pupils demonstrate high levels of autonomy, maturity, and responsibility. They value being able to talk to junior coaches or an adult if they're worried about anything. So what we can see here is the whole scale change that can happen when a coaching culture is brought into a school. And it's important that it crosses those boundaries between a professional individual and the fact that they're a private and personal individual as well. And it creates a space for them to be completely accepted and respected for who they are. So given all these benefits, Why isn't a coaching culture in existence in every school? What are the barriers? Well, firstly, I think there's something around misunderstanding of what coaching is for a few reasons. One being it's got a bit of a bad reputation sometimes because of historically it being used as a corrective measure, somebody being put into competencies and it being seen as a remedial supportive measure. And that just isn't the case with coaching now, as we now know it. Top executives across the corporate world will have a coach. I, as a coach, will also have a coach. It isn't about correcting anything at all. It's about exploring your potential and bringing the biggest and best difference to the world that you can. I think another reason for a misunderstanding of coaching is that it can get confused with mentoring. With Leadership Edge, we give out these packs when somebody signs up for a course, and it has this on the inside cover, which is a spectrum designed by Miles Downey. And you can see here that mentoring comes under a directive type of conversation where you give instructions and advice, whereas coaching is much more at this top end. You're listening not to give advice, but to understand where that person's coming from and what their true needs and interests are, and helping them to reflect on their needs and their choices. And finally, I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding. If a school has already tried coaching and it hasn't been successful, my thoughts on this and my experience on this has been that if a school has brought in, say, a one-day coaching course and thrown a few members of staff on it, that's great, but the knowledge of what coaching is really isn't the big deal here. It isn't really complicated. The knowledge that coaching is asking pertinent questions, active listening, abiding by confidentiality, and so on. Those aren't difficult concepts. What's difficult about coaching and where the challenge lies is building the skills and practicing them and managing yourself within those conversations so that you don't fall into giving advice, so that you don't pass judgment on what somebody is planning to do. It is skills based, so you need to practice it and you need support as you develop your skills. And also, we are talking about perhaps a shift in culture and a shift in mindset. And that doesn't just happen if you have some members of staff trying to do some coaching sessions every now and again. It really needs to be a school priority, which is passionately and clearly driven throughout the school. A second barrier, so we've had misunderstanding of what coaching is. The second barrier I'd like to talk about is what is the prevailing culture and leadership style in the school. Unfortunately, there will be schools out there where we have an ego leadership, where the desire is not to empower the staff, but to have them do as they are told. And we know from Goleman's leadership styles, don't we, that there is a time and a place for that. Some schools will need an element of that directive leadership for sure, but that is not the time to build a coaching culture. There are also schools where the leaders have fallen into a dependency culture, which could look a bit like this, which is from the Box of Crayons team, where the more my team needs me, the more I give them the answers. And they go in a very vicious cycle. It's very difficult to get out of. But coaching can help with that because it encourages the leaders to be more aware of how they're responding to their team on their requests for help and leadership, and it helps the staff, the teachers, and the colleagues to not go necessarily directly to the answers, but to use their own resources and thoughts and creativity to impact action and to make change happen. And the other culture that we may see in schools is a bit of a coasting mentality, where, well, we don't think we need coaching because everything's just fine. Why would I change it? Why would I bring that in? And these are all truths. These are all cultures that I've seen in schools. However, my belief is that development and personal development and learning is our business. It is what we're in schools to do, to model, and to leave as a legacy for our young people. And in this book, Kim Scott talks about the importance of that line that we can tread between staff suffering boredom and burnout, and how leading a team can be done much more consciously to engage staff, and coaching is one way of doing that, so they don't feel bored because they're just having to do things the way they're told, and they're not burning out because it's all too overwhelming. And coaching gives a reflective space for them to measure and really raise their awareness of the stresses that they're being put upon, and how their strategies to cope with that. Thirdly, of course, the barrier of money. We know school budgets are tight, and also the barrier of time, because we know that both of those are finite things, and only the biggest priorities will make the cut for schools. In terms of money, I want to talk about a CPD budget and how we spend that. Now, training can take many forms, can't it? But it is often instructional and a lot of input. And my question is, what is actually the return on that investment? And using this model, which is an evaluation model by Kirkpatrick, you can look at this first line, which is, well, how do people respond and react to that training? They may love it, and that's great. But how much of that actually translates into learning that they take away with them? And how much of that learning translates into a change of behavior where they're actually implementing what they've learned in their day-to-day roles? And furthermore, how much is that behavior actually getting you the results that you want? And it's only when you assess all of that that you can actually assess what is your return on investment. Now, my belief is that if we spend a little bit less money on training and input, and match it with coaching, budget for coaching and time for coaching, then we will actually create a better return on investment from the money that you put into your training, because members of staff are given that opportunity to reflect on that training and build it in to their work, rather than just let it go by the wayside. Let's move away from a tick box mentality, which does exist in some schools, where, well, I've provided the training, therefore it should be done. But is it? And why isn't it? And coaching can provide a way for people to work that out for themselves and to take a bit of ownership. The other thing about money with coaching, of course, is that the costs reduce over time, because once you've started to train and upskill a kind of initial cohort, this is what we do with Leadership Edge, you train an initial cohort who then start coaching their colleagues, and therefore you don't need any external experts to come and do that for you, because you've now got in-house experts. So as you build the culture, the costs just get less and less over time. And one of the main premises of coaching is that you don't create dependency. And as all ex-school leaders within Leadership Edge, we certainly don't want to be hanging around your school any longer than is necessary. As soon as you are self-sustaining the coaching yourselves, then we will move on to another school. We'll be there if you need us, but that isn't the plan. The plan is that you do it yourselves, and so the cost becomes negligible, if not zero. Final barrier, time. That's the one I hear a lot. I don't have time to look into this. There are creative solutions, but it's all about where there's a will, there's a way, and it's about getting coaching as a priority within your school. And once it's prioritized, you will find solutions, such as schools I've been in, where they cover each other's lessons so that the other can have a coaching session, and they're willing and happy, genuinely fine to do that because it meets their purpose. Or perhaps the school leadership team would give up some staff meeting time to allow members of staff to meet to coach each other. So there are ways, but again, it's only once it becomes a priority for your school. So I've gone through those 4 barriers there. The idea that coaching can be misunderstood, that there can be a prevailing culture which is detrimental to bringing in coaching, money and how we allocate our budget, and time and how we prioritize our use of time. So how do we overcome those barriers? My biggest question is, well, what happens if we don't overcome those barriers? How important is it to tap into people's and develop people's intrinsic motivation? I would ask school leaders to think about what's happening to their leadership capacity within school. Is it developing? I would ask them to think about the staff's morale and their sense of motivation. What level's that at? I would ask them to think about the students' results and their working behaviours. And I would ask you to think again about your budget and how much is being spent on recruitment for turnover and supply for burnout and stress and illness. Now, coaching can certainly contribute positively to all of those concerns. And I think once it has become a priority, the next step to overcoming these barriers is for the school leaders to experience coaching themselves. I've spoken to school leaders who say, I thought I knew what coaching was, Catherine. I've read about it. I knew it. I was going to bring it into the school. But actually, it's only now that I've had it myself that I really get it. And I'm absolutely going to bring it into the school. And that comes back again to the drive, that it's become an internal motivation for them, not something they feel they ought to do or they should give it a try because they've run out of ideas or something. It is absolutely at the heart of what they believe to be important for their school. And I think until you have that passion about coaching, the likelihood of you shifting the culture and embedding coaching is uncertain. If you take a change model, because what we're talking about here is change management. If you take a change model like Cotter here, where you go through the different steps of creating an urgency, creating a guiding team, and so on, each of those requires determination. Each of those requires prioritization. And unless you feel and believe in the power of coaching, how far are you going to get along this before another priority, a competing priority, comes along and overshadows coaching? And in terms of creating an urgency for it, my question now is, what is the current need for coaching? And my answer is quite high, because obviously with COVID and the levels of anxiety in schools, we need to, or rather our individuals in school would benefit from that headspace, from that private, confidential thinking time. Obviously, we also have issues around retention of our staff and recruitment of new teachers. And this is an urgent need as well, which can be really healthily supported by creating a coaching culture, as we saw at East Park. And also, society is changing and workplaces are changing. And I'm not sure how well schools are keeping up. This book by Mandy Coulter takes years of experience of HR within private sector companies and brings it into schools, and shows how that can be done. Thinking of more modern approaches to people development, and coaching is core within that, but it's a great read. There's lots of hints and tips and techniques to consider as well. So, in summary, I would say it's time to check in with our school priorities and make doubly sure that we are putting our people first. After all, schools are communities. They're not factories. They're communities in which we feed off each other all the time. So depending on that conversation and the style of that conversation, all manner of impact can occur. And when the conversation style becomes a coaching conversation style, as we saw at East Park, everything can change for the better. Thank you for listening, and I hope I've given you some things to think about, and I would love to know your thoughts, and would love to obviously have a conversation with you about coaching as well. Good luck in your schools. All the best.